property of this global private government. But, of course, this article attempts to make it all a divide-and-conquer strategy, making the fight between the industrialized and the developing nations. Individuals known as the Circle of Commitment, understood to include UK, US, and Denmark, had only been shown to a handful of countries since it was finalized this week. The agreement leaked to The Guardian is a departure from the Kyoto's protocol principle that rich nations which have emitted the bulk of CO2 should take on the firm and binding commitments to reduce greenhouse gases, while poorer nations will not be compelled to act. The draft hands effective control of the climate change finance to the World Bank and would abandon the Kyoto Protocol, the only legally binding treaty that the world has on emission restrictions, and would make any money to help poor countries adapt to climate change dependent on them taking a range of actions. So it's the same thing you see in the 2002 IMF World Bank documents. They come in with over a 100-point plan where countries have to agree to give their water supply to a private corporation, to give their roads to a private corporation. Always private corporations owned and controlled by the private banking companies that operate under the holding company of the IMF World Bank, Bank of England, private Federal Reserve. And so that's all this is. This is the world under a new debt system, but where private banks take third world tax money on all carbon, first world tax money on all carbon, give it to the private banks. They then loan it out because it would just be fiat currency if it wasn't paid by taxpayers. It's that labor that gives it value, that chattel labor. So it's a world slave index. And then they will pay the nations of the earth and all travelers and all money transfers, stock fees, all financial transactions, the way this reads, will have a tax on it as well. And then that will be fed through the private IMF, World Bank, EXIM, International Bank of Settlements Consortium, and then they will loan it out at compounding, loan sharking rates of upwards, in some cases higher than 30% to the third world nations and the first world nations. Just like with the TARP money, they give trillions of dollars to private banks. They then loan it back to the federal and state governments. And this was duplicated everywhere. This is private banks taking over the world. It continues. I'm reading from The Guardian. The draft hands effective control of climate change finance, that's the taxes, to the World Bank, would abandon the Kyoto Protocol, the only legally binding treaty that the world has on emission reductions, and would make any money to help poorer countries adapt to a climate change development dependent on them taking a range of actions. See, they have to go under complete global government control under the purse strings manipulation. The document was described last night by one senior diplomat as a very dangerous document for developing countries. It is a fundamental reworking of the UN's balance of obligations. It is to be superimposed without discussion on the talks. See, it's all dictatorial. A confidential analysis of the text by developed countries, also seen by The Guardian, they have a link to the document, we have the document here in my hands, shows deep unease over details of the text, and particularly it is understood to force developing countries to agree to specific emission cuts and measures that were not part of the original UN agreement. They have to make double the cuts we do. Divide poor countries further by creating a new category of developed countries called the most vulnerable, so it can be selectively enforced to further vertically integrate and consolidate those nations and shut off their food and water supplies, as State Department Memorandum 200, written by Henry Kissinger in 1973, states the global plan. So this is a plan he developed and deployed, and then it was written into a textbook format by John P. Holdren that's now being implemented fully. Weaken the UN's role in handling climate finance. That means taxes. Not allow poor countries to emit more than 1.44 tons of carbon per person, and of course that will track everyone, which allows rich countries to emit 2.67 tons, or close to double. Developing countries that have seen the text are understood to be furious that it is being promoted by rich countries without their knowledge and without discussion in the negotiations. Yes, see, when you sign on to the Copenhagen Agreement, you waive all your rights as a nation, and the United Nations / IMF World Bank can make all the decisions. It's a sharecropper contract where you just sign over and say, I'm your slave. I'm your indentured servant. It is being done in secret. This is the London Guardian, not Alex Jones, not Lord Monckton. That's a quote. Clearly, the intention is to get Barack Obama and the leaders of the rich countries to muscle it through when they arrive next week. It effectively is the end of the UN process, said one diplomat who asked to remain nameless. See, this is the true birth of the private global government. What does my film, Fall the Republic, detail? This exact process, how the private banks will become the open world government that you will pay your taxes to. And no one else, even in the Patriot movement, knows how to read these documents or cover this. I have all these banking experts on. I have all these individuals on. And I'm not tooting my horn, but we understand it. I understand their program because I actually read the large body of work by these people. I understand their governing structure. So Fall the Republic came out a month and a half ago. This came out yesterday. And you watch Fall the Republic. In fact, as soon as Rob gets here, ask him to print the script for Fall the Republic. I want to read to you what I wrote for the voiceover. Exactly what this article says, exactly what the document says. Word for word, how this transfer was going to happen. And we've seen globalists for years say at the final moment they're going to make the UN even more toothless than it already was and transfer full power to a private global dictatorship. All being done in secret. And it's all happening right now. Meanwhile, Psychology Today is writing articles about me saying I'm insane. I believe in a private global corporate government. And you can play these people clips of world leaders saying it on television, and they'll just say, you're insane. I didn't just see that. My friends, I want everyone to just sit back and let it sink in that open world government is being established by the very same central banks that engineered the financial collapse of last year and this year, and who have all registered record profits. They want to use government to force you off your farms, your ranches, to shut down industry so you become bankrupt, so they fully control you. We are literally becoming slaves right now. Now, in the West, we're just going to become poverty-stricken slaves. The people have already died by the hundreds of thousands due to world food prices doubling in the last 3 years because of environmental policies and ethanol that was encouraged by governments around the world to be produced. 1/3 of the grain fields, the corn fields, the wheat fields were converted to this. And so now the third world is starving to death. Millions and millions starve to death a year. That is the cold-blooded plan. And if the establishment can get you to starve to death, they'll do it too. They want you bankrupt. They control the banks that issue the currency and credit. These yuppies always write me or email me or ask me on the street, well, don't the big banks want to make money? Don't they want consumer slaves? They wanted to get you dependent as consumer slaves or get you in the justice system or get you in the psychiatric system or get you into the military. They want you under their control. And their number one tool is economic bondage, bankrupting the economy, so you've got to work for the government. And then, of course, the government takes most of the tax money and pays it into the corporate welfare coffers. Because we call it government, but most of it is administered now by private corporations, intelligence, spying, the military, policing. Everything is being converted to private hands, and only select corporations get the government contracts. Under this carbon tax system, they take Western money, third world money. They go into the third world and they say, we'll give you this aid at interest if you do everything we tell you to do. And what does State Department Memorandum 200 say? By Henry Kissinger, we will use war, we will use famine to reduce population, and we will use IMF and World Bank loans and tell India and Brazil and Nigeria and 15 countries he listed that they have to cut their population by half if they want this money. But they haven't been able to force that. So now they want their world government in place. The United Nations, from Peru to India, pays local governments to literally grab women off the street, to grab men off the street and sterilize them. Or they have them sign forms. You come in, you're homeless. They say, I will give you $1,000 and a factory job if you let us tie your tubes. If you let us sterilize you. This is on record.